Mizmor LeDavid, Anoi Roi Lo Exar, Bino Deshe Yarbitzeni, Al Mi Minochot Yanchileni, Nafshi Yeshovev, Yancheni B'Magle Tzedek L'man Shemo, Gam Kielech B'Getz Amalvet, Lo Irara Kiata Imadi, Shiftecha Min Shaftecha, Hema Yinachumeni, Tarach Lefanai Shalchan Neget Zorara, Tishanta B'Shem Roshi, Kosi Rivaya, Aktov Chesed Irdefuni Kol Yemei Chaya, V'Shafti B'Beit Adonai La'orech Yamim. A song of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. God causes me to lie down in lush pastures. God leads me beside tranquil waters. God restores my soul and guides me in righteous paths for God's name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your scepter and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of my days. Jody Feld, Selma's granddaughter, will now share some words.
As we say goodbye to Grandma Selma, I'm struck by how incredibly lucky I have been to have my grandmother with me for almost 41 years. Not only with me, but an integral, close part of my life. It's sometimes rare for a grandparent-grandchild relationship to be so essential and so long-lasting, but Grandma Selma was like that. She kept tabs on all of us, and yet at the same time had this amazing ability to make each one of us feel like we were the most important and the most special to her. And we were. She loved all her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren deeply and fully. She was the type of person who just had more love in her heart for the more people who joined our lives and our family. It might have kept her on the phone for more hours each day, but she didn't mind. We were the most important people in the world to her, and she was proud of us all. And when she finally took her last breaths, she had seen all of us happy, content, and successful in our lives with careers, husbands, and children of our own. And she was able to die knowing that all of her loose ends were tied up. We were all going to be all right. I have so many memories of Grandma, but no story about my relationship with her would be complete without the one that she liked to tell most often. I was her first grandchild, and when I was born, up until the time I was 4 years old, we lived nearby to Grandma and Papa. My mom worked, and my grandma watched me while she did. She loved to tell people that she was the one who taught me to ride my tricycle, and she boasted that she potty trained me at 18 months old. She was also the one who famously locked me and the keys to the car inside at the grocery store. She never tired of telling that story to me. She would say that I would cry, "No, Daddy," those evenings when my dad came to pick me up to go home. And she said that she too cried when we moved away to Detroit. But we saw her and Papa often, even after we moved. Sometimes they would just take a day trip up to Detroit to see us and then leave around dinner time, satisfied that we were all doing well and that we were happy. But even better than her visits to Detroit were visits to her house. I loved eating dinner at her house. She made the best food, and then she dipped it all in ketchup. I loved her baked macaroni and cheese, doused in lots of ketchup, and her mandel bread that was always frozen. There was always a baggie of chocolates in her refrigerator door, which she swore were for the Maj ladies, but that she let us pillage anyways. And a stockpile of soda in her laundry room that we snuck when my mom wasn't looking. She didn't like salt, and she liked her food hot. I don't think I ever sat through a meal with her when she didn't complain about the temperature of her food. When I was a little older, I would fly to Florida with my sister Deborah for a visit, and we would all take walks after dinner, play Rummikub, and then watch Wheel of Fortune with Papa while she washed the dishes, a dish towel thrown over her shoulder always. There was no better place to be. One of my favorite memories of her was watching her and Papa walk down the aisle at my wedding. I'll never forget how touching I found it that they had held hands all the way down that long aisle. I told her later, after all the fanfare died down, that I hoped that Mike and I were still holding hands after some 50 years of marriage. She laughed a little at that and told me the reason they were holding hands was they didn't fall down the aisle. After Papa passed away, I feared that her heart was so broken that she might soon follow, but she didn't. She had late-night chats with me about my own Maj game. She gave me pointers, and she tried to convince me to take up canasta instead. She watched sports, the Cleveland Indians and her beloved Cavaliers. And when I didn't think that she could be any more special than she already was, she treated my husband as her own flesh and blood grandson. She bragged about him being a doctor. She made basketball bets over corned beef sandwiches. Interestingly, the Pistons actually played Cleveland last night. We killed them. She'd be so mad. She told him that Kevin Love was her boy. She argued over the greatness of LeBron with him. On our last visit to Cleveland, Grandma and Mike watched basketball together. She told him she wouldn't ever forgive LeBron for leaving Cleveland a second time. And then, ironically, she left Cleveland again, too. As I have shared the news of my grandma's passing with my friends and colleagues, they have mentioned how old they were when their last grandparent passed away. Most of them were in their 20s. So I come back to this notion that for almost 41 years, Grandma has been an influential and important part of my life. Until these last few weeks, I hadn't realized how truly exceptional that is. She's so much part of my life and of who I am that even though I knew she would one day leave us, I can't quite believe she's gone. Grandma, you influenced my life for 41 years. Some marriages don't last that long. You helped shape who I am, who my children are, who my husband is. You influenced us all so greatly. I will always love you. I will forever save a special place in my heart just for you. I hope you're with Papa now, nagging at him for putting too much salt on his eggs, playing the quarter slot machines, and holding hands together in the warmth.
Selma's son, Howard, will now also share some words.
So my mother, Selma Feldman, was married to the love of her life, Nathan Feldman, for 64 years. She lived a long time, even by today's standards, to 1 week short of her 97th birthday. It would have been Tuesday. She had 4 children and their spouses. She had 17 grandchildren, counting their spouses, and she always did. And one more will be joining my family this September. And she had 20 great-grandchildren. Her extended family stretches across the globe, from Cleveland to Portland, Detroit, Atlanta, Columbus, Israel, and beyond. It's hard to try and encapsulate a person's life in a few words, especially one like my mother's, which lasted such a long time. But I hope you'll be patient with me as I share some memories of her with you. Some of you may know intimately because you were there. Some memories you may not know, or even if you once did, you may have forgotten them over the years. I hope some of them will bring a smile to your face and a lightheartedness, remembering my mother and what she was like in her earlier years, as opposed to the more difficult years later in her life when her health became compromised. She lost her sight, she lost my dad, and she decided that life was just too hard. There's no doubt that family and friends were her genuine pride and joy. This was something she learned growing up here in Cleveland with her own family. She was one of 8 children. She was the second youngest. Because of the age difference between her and several of her siblings, she grew up an aunt to a number of nephews and nieces that weren't much younger than her. It was a true mingling of generations. And as for friends, they had them in abundance. My parents helped create a club with their closest friends. Every month, the men played cards and the women mahjong. And every New Year's Eve, they came home with what I thought were the silliest party hats, poppers, and confetti, and now we're the ones wearing the silly stuff. What goes around comes around. I remember spending many Saturdays at my Aunt Jeanette's, one of her older sisters, who's here today, or my Uncle Bob's, or some other family member's home, the kids all playing with one another while the grown-ups sat and kibitzed over coffee and cake. And the family picnics at the parks. It was a chance for those of us who were younger to try and play ball with some of my older cousins, like Marty and Denny, Earl, Ronnie, Phil, and others. My mother impressed upon us the importance of family and getting together periodically. I think she was sad, however, that so many of our family moved away to pursue their lives and didn't get to have similar family experiences. My mother had some great loves in her life besides her siblings. No question my dad was number one. Like Jody said when they walked down the aisle, they always held hands when walking, no matter where they were or how old they were. My mother told my wife once when my father was born, they broke the mold, and she did everything she could to ensure he would be with her for a long time. Jen and I used to laugh when she would count out 10 peanuts for him every day. That was his daily allowance. And then when she wasn't looking, he would sneak some ice cream. She particularly took pleasure in his involvement with Warrensville Center Synagogue, an earlier iteration of Oheb Zedek. She was so proud of his becoming president. But some of you might not know that if it wasn't for my Aunt Bunny, who is also here, we might not be here. My father wasn't particularly aggressive when it came to women. He and my mother dated for a long time. In fact, a very long time. And it wasn't until my father's sister, my Aunt Bunny, told my mother, "Give him an ultimatum already. Either marry me or get lost," she said. Otherwise, he would never ask her to marry him. He was just too shy. So thank you, Aunt Bunny, and thanks, Mom, for taking her advice. My mom loved to dance, and my dad wasn't a big fan. But when it came to my bar mitzvah, they took lessons together, and they practiced in our little living room. And when my dad had had enough, it was my turn to step in and box step and cha-cha around the room with her. As for us children, she was always there when needed. I remember playing Little League baseball starting when I was 9, which means my sisters and brother were about 5 and 6 at the time. Somehow, she managed to attend every game, generally sitting on a blanket on the first baseline, wrangling the kids and cheering me on, even though she didn't really care that much for the game. But she was there, waiting for my father to join her once he finished work. In retrospect, it was really cute. But at the time, I didn't know how lucky I and my siblings were. Thanks for the modeling lesson, Mom. I hope we all learned from it. Overprotective? My mother? My Aunt Alkie told me a story once about how when I was about 3 years old, she bought me the coolest pair of cowboy boots. She went all over town looking for those boots, and she spent a fortune on them. A couple of days later, however, my mother took the boots to, I believe it was Cubby's shoe store, and had them cut off the heels. They were too high, and she was worried I would fall over. Probably one of the reasons that today I'm afraid of heights. My mother didn't teach me to cook, something that would have been useful. Then again, what would she have taught me? You take a whole lot of paprika and you pour it over a whole chicken, you throw it in the oven at whatever the highest temperature an oven can reach, and you keep it in there for a long time. Same with the meat. Just use ketchup and aim for well done. I did learn to duplicate her salads. Not too hard. Lettuce, carrots, tomatoes, cucumbers. That was pretty much it. And then my wife said, no more bottled dressing. My mom did, however, teach me an important lesson, and I hope my siblings also learned it. She taught me to be a compulsive cleaner. Every Friday afternoon, she would get on her hands and knees and clean the floor. My wife thought it was hilarious when one time we were visiting and we had some of the aunts and uncles over for Saturday afternoon coffee and cake, and cousins. A crumb hit the floor. My mother ran to get the vacuum, made everyone stand up, moved their chairs, and vacuumed the floor. When she was finished, then the kibitzing could begin again. But it had to reach her level of cleanliness, no one else's. I think my uncle that dropped the crumb may have been banned from our house for quite some time. Sadly, I have never quite reached my mother's level of cleaning expertise, but I'm only 70 and I'm just still working on it. My mother loved to travel. She loved visiting Israel and Hawaii, two places that really only have palm trees and heat in common. But Las Vegas was the place she and my father loved the most. They must have gone 20 to 30 times. They could sit there next to each other, playing the nickel or dime slot machines, seldom speaking to one another, but feeling totally connected. And if they lost a few bucks, it was a good day. And my mom and dad loved the trotters. They used to go to Northfield Park here in Cleveland to watch the drivers in their resplendent colors, riding on their sulkies, being pulled by the horses. There was nothing like watching my mom and dad yelling their heads off as they would complain that the driver of their horse had pulled up on the reins to ensure the horse would lose, causing the Feldmans to lose another $2 bet. Big gamblers, my parents. My parents were incredibly disciplined. They always followed the rules. Integrity within the family was absolutely imperative to them. I believe they understood right from wrong, and while they weren't big conversationalists, they showed by their actions their strong moral compass. My mother had some other interests besides playing mahjong. She loved a particular soap opera that was on from 1 to 2 every weekday. Don't call during that time. You were likely to get an earful. But the truth was, she would still stay on that phone for as long as she needed to, and you needed to, and talk to you, and talk to you. Because she also knew that as soon as we were through, she could call her niece Beverly or her friend Dasha and catch up on the episode. Truthfully, she thought the DVR was mankind's greatest invention. She collected yadros and glass bells. She had little interest in art, but in these she found great pleasure. She loved taking out the bells and sharing with you the sounds they made. And she became a big Cavaliers and Indians fan in her later years. Even when she couldn't see, she would sit and listen to the games on television and ask her grandson Mike about their friendly wagering on Cleveland versus Detroit sports teams. And one last thing. My mother became a little bit difficult at times as she aged. She sometimes told people what she thought without considering the consequences. At some point, she may have caused some of you to wince, to hang up the phone prematurely, to say to yourself, what's wrong with her? But I hope you know that she loved you all and she never meant to hurt anyone. Mom, we're going to miss you, but we know that you're with Dad, which is where you always wanted to be. Give him a kiss and a hug from all of us, and know that you've left us plenty of memories about which to reminisce. Thank you.
We're together today to mourn and recall the life of Selma Feldman. The parshiot that we have been reading over the last few weeks have described the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which was not only a spiritual center for the Jewish people while they were in the Midbar, while they traveled in the desert, but building it was also a communal undertaking, and it was a communal gathering place. Bringing people together, as well as building and supporting Jewish institutions, were at the center of Selma's life. She was born in Cleveland in 1922, and as Howard mentioned, she would have turned 97 on Tuesday. She was the second youngest of 8 children and was close with all of her siblings. But she had a particularly special relationship with her brother Ernie and her sister Frida. The fact that Selma was one of 8 children meant that her children, Howard, Andy, Shelley, and Steve, grew up surrounded by a large extended family. And it was important to Selma that her children felt close to all of their cousins. You all recall to me how important the regular Sunday gatherings were with your cousins in your backyard or at the park, as well as how often you would come together, whether at Little League games or for 4th of July fireworks. These were family moments that really mattered to your mom. You also told me about how your mom loved to travel with the family. And Shelley, you recalled how this meant driving cross country in the 1960s without air conditioning, between whether it was to New York or to LA. And later family trips included going to Israel and frequent visits to Hawaii. And as Howard described, though, your parents' favorite vacation spot may have been Las Vegas. They went there countless times together. But it didn't really matter where your parents were, you said, because wherever they were, they could always just spend hours sitting next to each other, enjoying each other's company. You all shared with me how dedicated your parents were to each other and how they always held hands wherever they went, and they never went anywhere without the other, even to the point where your mom said on the way to the cemetery at your dad's funeral, "This is the first time he's going anywhere without me." She often remarked, as Howard said, that they broke the mold after her husband Nathan was born. She couldn't imagine there was anyone else in the world as special as he was. Selma and Nathan both recognized the importance of building strong Jewish institutions, and she took great pride in the fact that he served as a president of Warrensville Center Synagogue. And Shelley, you also described how your mom made sure that you got accepted into a Jewish summer program that was an essential part of your Jewish journey and inspired you throughout your life. Selma's passion for Judaism and the Jewish community is something that she passed on to her children and grandchildren, all of whom are deeply involved in their local Jewish communities wherever they live. Throughout her life, she felt very close to all of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. If Andy and Shelley were to call at the same time in the morning just to check in, it would annoy her. Not because she didn't want to speak to them, but because then she would have to choose who to talk to and who to call back. She was proud of all of her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren and often told people how many she had. Selma had 17 grandchildren and 20 great-grandchildren. Now, this number of grandchildren is slightly more than you might expect. In fact, it's nearly double, because, as I was told, she always told everyone that the spouses of her grandchildren were her grandchildren as well. May her legacy of building Jewish community and bringing family together be a blessing for her family and an inspiration for us all. Please rise now for the memorial prayer. Amalei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamzeh Menucha Nechona, Al Kanfei Chashchina, B'malot, Kedoshim Utarim, Kezohar Harikiah, Mazkirim et Nishmat, Simcha Bat Yosef, Shachacha La'olama Bavor Shanachnu Mipalim Ba'ad Haskarat, Nishmata Began Eden, Techei Menuchata, L'chein Baal Harachamim Yastera, Beseter Kenafav La'olamim, B'yitzor Hachaim et Nishmata Adonai Hu, Nachalata, B'tanoach B'shalom, Al Mishkava, V'nomar, Amen. God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper repose on the sheltering wings of your presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, onto the soul of Simchat Bat Yosef, who has gone to her world and for whose memory we pray. May her repose be in paradise. May the Master of Compassion bring her under the cover of God's wings and bind her soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be her heritage, and may she repose on her resting place in peace. And let us say, Amen.